The Voices of the Sun Belt feature continues. It's Georgia State Panthers, Dave Cohen on Locked On Sun Belt.
You are Locked On Sun Belt, your daily podcast on the Sun Belt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sun Belt, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The playoffs have winded down, but the sports have stopped sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We got the St. Jude's Classic FedEx Cup starting in golf this weekend. All right, we got a great episode for you. We got Dave Cohen heading into his 42nd year as the voice of the Panthers, his 15th doing Georgia State football. And there's a lot of excitement in Atlanta with Dell McGee recruiting for 2025 and, this year as well. And they have, as we've discussed before, an interesting schedule. They don't leave the city of Atlanta until October 17th, a Thursday night game in Marshall. They get their first 5 games, including their season opener against Georgia Tech, all in Atlanta. So we will talk to him about that. He talks about the quarterback room, the running back room. We talk about the transfer portal and those 2024 expectations. He is the voice of the Georgia State Panthers. He is Dave Cohen on Locked On Sun Belt. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sun Belt, your team every day. I'm your affable host, David Schultz. We are doing our Voices of the Sun Belt feature. We're bringing in my buddy from the Georgia State Panthers. He is Dave Cohen. What year is this for you as the voice of the Panthers there, Dave?
Overall, Dave, this will be year 42.
Whoa.
And, of course, I've done all 14 seasons of Georgia State football. So those 42 years have been basketball, a little bit of women's basketball over the years, and a little bit of baseball each and every season. But, yeah, football, this will be – and it's hard to believe this is going to be the 15th season of Georgia State football. Mm-hmm. 14 years have – in hindsight, have kind of flown by when you look back at it.
How many head coaches have there been?
Bill Curry was the first head coach, and he was here for, 2 seasons prior to ramping up and playing. So he was the head coach for 3 years, followed by Trent Miles, followed by Sean Elliott, who's now back at South Carolina. And now Dell McGee, who came over from the University of Georgia, is technically the 4th head coach. There was an interim between Trent Miles and Sean Elliott for 2 games, Tim Lopano, but that's more of a trivia question. He's not listed among the full-time head coaches.
Correct. I thought for some reason I thought there would be more. All right, so tell us, what the effect of that Dell McGee has had on this program. Crazy way that he got hired, right? Sean Elliott takes a job with South Carolina, closer to his family, and spring ball had already started, and then boom, we got a new head football coach, and we got to ramp up all again. What was that process like up close and personal?
Well, it certainly did turn on a dime. It caught a lot of people from the outside looking in by surprise. Those of us that are somewhat on the inside, I wasn't totally surprised. Coach Elliott finished with a 41-44 record overall here at Georgia State. Did a great job turning the program around from the time in which he inherited it, left it certainly in much better shape than it was when he got to Atlanta. But again, it's become a well-known story. His family, his wife and 2 children, they never moved to Atlanta. He had a place here in town. And, when the opportunity arose, he would go back to Columbia and, still trying to watch his son play football and watch his daughter, who I think was a cheerleader, and they're both in high school. And so, the last time I actually really talked to him was right after we won the famous Idaho Potato Bowl out in Boise, Idaho, and that was in front of the buses before we were heading to the airport to fly back to Atlanta. At that point, nobody had any inkling, but
did he have any inkling? Because that's December, right?
That's December.
Yeah,
exactly. Of course, I don't think that he knew at that time that the opportunity at South Carolina would present itself. It was really kind of a bang, bang play, as they would say. the previous coach and coaching tight ends, and I guess the run game coordinator at South Carolina decides to leave. That opens up the door for Coach Elliott, and he decided to, move forward with that opportunity. But again, it kind of caused Georgia State football to press the pause button there for a second, because you're right, we were 2 or 3 sessions into spring practice, and all of a sudden your head coach is walking out the door. The assistants, the coordinators that stayed, kept things together for the time being. But right away, Georgia State and our athletic director had to go into a coaching search. And so they selected Dell McGee, was running backs coach at University of Georgia, just up the road over in Athens. And, that's a guy that's been at Athens for the last 8 seasons. He's got 2 national championship rings. He's been coaching some of the best collegiate running backs in college football for the last 8 seasons. So he brings a wealth of coaching experience and knowledge to Georgia State. And, one thing I remember asking him shortly after he got here was, Georgia had played some Sun Belt Conference schools over the last 8 years. And so at that point, you're on the outside looking in, meeting from Coach McGee's standpoint. I said, now you're on the inside and you're a Sun Belt football head coach. How's the view that much different? And he's obviously, in some coach speak, listen, it's a great league. I mean, he didn't follow it week in and week out because he's concerned with what's going on with Georgia's next opponent.
Sure. Right.
But now that he's in it, he sees and has a much closer look at how good Sun Belt Conference football is and what it's going to take here at Georgia State in order to become a quote-unquote player and a force in the Sun Belt's Eastern Division, which we've kind of been a mid-level Sun Belt Eastern Division program. We haven't yet won the Sun Belt East. We haven't yet obviously played for a Sun Belt championship. As Coach Elliott always said, that's the next step. Well, we just haven't been able to make the next step as of yet. Bringing Coach McGee in here and the level of talent that has already been attracted to Georgia State, it's going to be interesting not only this coming season, but next season, in 2 seasons from now, what the Georgia State football roster will look like from a recruiting standpoint, because certainly their approach to recruiting is a little bit different than the previous staff. They really focus in on Atlanta, the Atlanta area, and the state of Georgia. As a matter of fact, they consider the Atlanta area, the metro Atlanta counties, which is 6 or 7 counties, that's considered by this staff to be one state. The rest of the state of Georgia is the second part of the state.
Sure.
And then, of course, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, so on and so forth. So the approach is a lot different from a recruiting standpoint. And already this staff has got commitments for next year from 2 4-star running backs.
All right, let's take a timeout. When we come back, we'll talk more with Georgia State Panthers' Dave Cohen about Dell McGee's approach, doing a great job recruiting for 2025, but that's going to take a minute for those players to have an effect. What about the new guys he's bringing in the transfer portal for 2024? We will do that right after I tell you about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have winded down, we're getting fewer and fewer games, and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Still got golf, you got preseason football, and of course you have Major League Baseball. There's plenty to get in on with a FanDuel, official partner with Major League Baseball. Dave Schultz, Lockdown Sunbelt, your team every day. Let's get back to it. He is the voice of the Georgia State Panthers, Dave Cohen. He talks about the immediate impact that Dell McGee could have with all the transfers that were brought in by the new coaching staff of the Panthers.
So
So, well, that's the thing. So here's the issue that I always have with that. We're talking with Dave Cohen, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day, voice of the Georgia State Panthers. So often we get conflated with the recruiting that's not going to happen. These players aren't going to play until 2025, even if then, right? Usually there is, not so much anymore, but usually there's a year of, working their way into the lineup. Special players don't necessarily need that. And then the results on the field. So he's doing a great job recruiting for 2025 and down the road. But who did he bring in, from the transfer portal this year that's going to play this season? Because again, he could have the number one class in 2025, but if they, go 3-9, it's going to be a little bit disappointing. Although those two things really don't have anything to do with each other, to be honest with you.
Right. Well, yeah, I see exactly what you're saying, but I guess what I was trying to say is the level of talent and the fact that some of the better Atlanta area and state of Georgia prospects, whether they come here, stay 4 years, come here, stay 2 years, we don't know what's going to happen yet.
Sure.
But they are taking a closer look. They are taking a second look at the Georgia State program as an option for their college football career. Right away, though, as he said at Sunbelt Conference Football Media Day, and that was as of the 23rd of July, there were 48 new faces on the Georgia State roster that were not here last season. So right away, as every school in the country, but for us, we just focus in on Sunbelt schools, the transfer portal has been a big, big issue, whether from a positive or a negative standpoint. We've seen it from both ways because we've lost a number of our best players the last 2 years with Coach Elliott trying to re-recruit his own players only to lose them to Power 5 programs. We lost Robert Lewis off of last year's team. He's at Auburn. We lost Montavious Cunningham. He's at Virginia Tech. I could run down a whole list of players that are now playing at Power 5 programs that were really our best players here at Georgia State. But what he's brought in this year, Zach, from a quarterback standpoint, I think right now it's a two-player race. While Coach Elliott was still here, they attracted Zach Gibson, who's a local Atlanta area product out of Johns Creek High School up near where I live. He started at Akron, transferred to Georgia Tech, and went from Georgia Tech now to Georgia State. And interestingly enough, Georgia State opens the season against Georgia Tech August 31. Also in the mix is Christian Veillere. This is going to be his third stop. Started at Penn State, transferred to Pitt. I think he played in 5 games last year or 7 games last year. He's now at Georgia State. Got a big arm. Both those guys are in the mid, 6'3", 6'4" height range. They also brought in another quarterback by the name of Kyle Lowe, transferred in from Middle Tennessee State. He's about 5'11", 6 feet. And then Braylon Ragland is still here. He came in as a freshman from Memphis, 2 seasons ago. So he's a redshirt. I think he's a redshirt sophomore. And then they got a walk-on who I think started over in Athens at Georgia, Raj Waldron. But after having been to practice and been to the scrimmage, the most recent scrimmage, it looks like it's Zach Gibson, Christian Veillere are going to battle it out to see who becomes the starting quarterback. The other thing about Georgia State's offense, from a quarterback standpoint, one of the things that I know they were really, really happy about is when Robert Lewis left, and again, he's now at Auburn, Talik Williams, who was our second leading receiver, also jumped into the portal. Shortly after Coach Elliott left, Coach McGee comes in. Talik Williams, I'm sure after a meeting, decided to come back to Georgia State, and they welcomed him back. So, he will be one of the top targets, if not the top target, for whichever quarterback ends up winning the job or whichever quarterback is on the field. But the other thing that Coach Elliott really cemented while he was here was running the football. He told me in the very first interview we ever did, because early on Georgia State in the program's history struggled to run the football. And Coach Elliott said, we're going to run the football. Over the last 5 seasons, Georgia State averaged 214 yards on the ground per game. And, of course, you saw us play. Darren Granger over the last 3 years was a big part of that.
Yeah.
I think 2 of those 3 seasons, he was our leading rusher. And And by the way, we lost Marcus Carroll, who was our leading rusher a year ago. He's at Missouri. That's another one of the big losses that this program suffered. But Freddie Brock came in prior to last season from Maine, really didn't play much at all last year, got an opportunity because of Marcus Carroll's transfer before the bowl game. He went in and rushed for 276 yards, a touchdown, set the famous Idaho Potato Bowl rushing record. He's back in the fold, and they have added around him a former Deion Sanders running back, Savion Wilkerson from Colorado. Great, a very nice kid. I've had a chance to talk to him. A kid that's run against Georgia State before from Coastal Carolina, C.J. Beasley. Michael Dukes, who started at Clemson, transferred to South Florida. Now he's in Atlanta with Georgia State. And another running back by the name of Jordan Ford, who was transferred in from Tulsa. So the running back room is loaded with guys that have played. One guy was here, Dominique Thomas, who had transferred in from Clemson. Just to show you the transfer portal, he got here in December. Coach Elliott leaves. He jumped right in the portal. I don't know where he is now, but he was only here for, 2 months.
Oh, goodness.
And decided that coaching change, I'm going to jump back in the portal and go elsewhere. So the quarterback room is loaded. The running back room is loaded. The wide receiver room is loaded. I think one of the big question marks, how good is the offensive line? Because we lost some pretty good players. Travis Glover's with the Green Bay Packers. We lost a couple others, either by transfer or graduation. So this new coaching staff is kind of having to, even though these are some mostly returning players, they're guys that are their role is increasing, for lack of a better term, than from what it was. They may have been a 2 last year. They're moving into a 1 this year. So, and obviously that's a big, that's a big factor as to how well we're able to run the football this year, because I can tell you Zach Gibson and Christian Veillere are not the same style quarterback with regards to running the football, and they're not nearly the same threat to run the football that Darren Granger was.
Sure.
So that's the situation, Dave, we're in right now offensively.
Talking to Dave Cohen, voice of the Georgia State Panthers, entering his 15th year calling football for Georgia State. I do want to talk to you. I'm wondering if you've had the chance to talk to these coaches again. ULM, Brian Vincent, I know you weren't there for that day at Media Day, but they're bringing in over 70 players. Coastal Carolina, I think Tim Beck said 66. Normally, these guys are bringing in somewhere between 18 to 25, or not normally, before the transfer portal was 18 to 25, and you can give a little bit more attention to they're basically freshmen and junior college players. But now what'd you just say, 45 players, 40 something?
48
players. And so how long does it take to integrate them into the program? It's nice that you have culture and values, but that's a process. Plus, these guys are not 18 anymore, right? Like you mentioned, these guys are on their 3rd or 4th stop. So these guys are now young men, and that's got to be a little bit different of a process when you're taking an 17, 18-year-old out of high school and integrating him into the program compared to a 21 or 22-year-old that's on his 3rd or 4th stop.
Well, most coaches, and, I didn't really talk to many of the coaches. I just listened when I was in New Orleans for Media Day. It certainly has changed the approach to recruiting. And I think, unless you're a 4-star or a 5-star, those maybe 3 and 2 and 1-star, if you want to go by the star system, has really obviously affected high school recruiting, because why try to go and bring in a guy and develop him? And if you develop him and you really do your job, he may only be with you for 2 seasons at the most, because he'll jump to try to chase some NIL money.
Right.
I think the approach now is pretty obvious. And, Georgia State is just like everybody else. When you're able to bring in guys who have already been developed and have already played and already have quite a bit of college football experience, sometime at the Group of 5 level, some of them at the Power 5 level, you got a better chance of bringing those guys in as long as you can bring them into the locker room and they can come into the locker room, so to say, and become part of the team and not cause any situation. I think a lot of coaches right now, with the pressure that there is to win and everybody chasing NIL money, you got to bring in guys that can keep you playing at the level that you were playing at the year prior, assuming that you were playing at a pretty good level. Georgia State again finished 7-6, should have been 8-5, but Coach Elliott again had pointed the program in the right direction. I think some other coaches want to look at it from the standpoint of balance. Do you want a roster that's heavy on transfers, guys that may only be with you for a year, or do you want to continue to recruit the best that you can at the high school level and hope you can bring in a guy or a kid that's going to come in and stay not just 2, but maybe 4 years. Maybe he does come in and want to stay at Georgia State or any school that's recruiting him because he's enjoying the experience. In this case, let's say he's enjoying the experience of being a student in the middle of downtown Atlanta and playing at Center Park Stadium. He doesn't want to be one of those players that feels like every year they got to enter the portal because that's what everybody else is doing.
Right.
So some coaches are looking for a little bit more of a balance as opposed to just relying completely on players that are in and out of the portal, on more than one occasion.
All right, we'll take one more break. We'll wrap it up with Dave Cohen. We're talking about Dell McGee's coaching background in addition to Georgia and those expectations with a wacky schedule in 2024. We'll do that right after I tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. And whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or for your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. And don't forget about, for your next listen, check out the Locked On College Football podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. I mean, this is right around the corner, right? We are quickly approaching. Teams are already in their third week of fall ball. All right, let's wrap things up with our guy, Dave Cohen from the Georgia State Panthers. We talked Dell McGee's coaching background and those expectations needing to get off to a good start because the schedule gets very hard, much harder later on with most of the games being on the road. He is the voice of the Georgia State Panthers, Dave Cohen. He is on Locked On Sunbelt. Talking to Dave Cohen, the voice of the Georgia State Panthers, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. All right, so remind me of Dell McGee's background, because he was a high school coach right there in Atlanta. Was he a head coach, a coordinator? Because his position coach buddy at Georgia, Fran Brown, is coaching my Orange, but he was kind of chosen over Bob Chesney, who's got all the head coaching experience, but was doing it at a lower level. Fran Brown's been doing the same thing that basically Dell McGee is doing in terms of recruiting and getting guys in. But what's his head coaching experience or calling plays, or what's he going to do game day? Is he nervous about that? Have you had a chance to talk to him what the game day operation is going to look like?
No, not game day operations as of yet. This staff operates much differently than the previous staff. And I'm not saying that one is necessarily better than the other, but it is run more like what you would expect an SEC staff to run a program like. They get in early and they are there late. They watch a lot of film. There are a lot of meetings. There doesn't seem to be a lot of downtime as we're in the midst of fall practice. But, Coach McGee's background, he's from Columbus, Georgia, played his high school football in Columbus, went on to play at Auburn, was obviously a pretty good player because he was in the National Football League with the Cardinals for a little while. From a coaching standpoint, as much as we, may hate to say it, he was at Georgia Southern briefly, And matter of fact, was the interim head coach. I forget, would have been 9-10 years ago.
So now he's coached at both GSUs, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Well, he has now. And so he does have a little experience in the borough down there in Statesboro before heading to Athens. But again, he's been on Kirby Smart's staff over at the University of Georgia the last 8 years, running backs coach. Okay. And he has learned a lot. He's talked about, especially on the day that he was hired, because, coaches all learn from everybody else. Who are your mentors? Obviously, every coach along the way has been a mentor for Coach McGee, but most recently Kirby Smart over at UGA. But prior to that, his high school coach, his college coaches at when he was a player at Auburn, his coaches when he was in the National Football League. So he brings a wealth of knowledge from a number of different coaching sources into what we're going to see as the Dell McGee coaching experience and the Dell McGee coaching tree. He has surrounded himself with a lot of experienced coaches, most notably Jim Chaney, who's been around the SEC quite a bit. He's our offensive coordinator. Kevin Shearer, who's been in the SEC, the ACC. He most recently been at Georgia Tech. He's your defensive coordinator. One of the other guys that he brought in, coaching the running backs, Will Healy, who was the coach at UNC Charlotte back in the day. Yeah. So he has brought in, guys that have a lot of college football coaching experience to Atlanta, Georgia. One of the things I found interesting, and this is, again, some of that useless information floating around my head that my wife always refers to, but you go back to 2019, Georgia State in the opening game of the season goes up to Knoxville and beats Tennessee. Jim Chaney and Kevin Shearer were both on that Tennessee Volunteer staff, and now they're our offensive and defensive coordinators here at Georgia State. How crazy is that?
Yeah. All right, so let's wrap things up with Dave Cohen, voice of the Georgia State Panthers. So, again, the expectations have probably been raised by Dell McGee because of the recruiting, but that may take a little bit to have some effect. However, it is one of the more odd schedules that we've ever seen in college football. Forget about leaving the state. The Panthers don't leave the city of Atlanta until October 17th. They could Uber to their game against Georgia Tech, being in the same city. That poses the issue, I guess. They have to get off to a good start. Because if their first four out of their first 5 games are at home, Georgia Tech being in the same city, that means on the back end, they're going to be on the road a lot. The opportunity is there to win early because they are playing at home. Vanderbilt comes down to Atlanta. It's going to be that is one of the more interesting schedules ever. You're not going to get any meal money until October 17th.
We'll be starving by the time we get to Marshall. Yeah, we play Georgia Tech here on the 31st, and then it's Chattanooga. And Chattanooga's coached by Rusty Wright, former Georgia State assistant under Sean Elliott those first couple of years. And then you're right, Vanderbilt comes in, followed by Georgia Southern, which for us, the Georgia State, Georgia Southern, that's early compared to where we've normally played them. It's normally been in, mid to late November when we've played them. And then Old Dominion on October 12th. And then, as I call it, the gauntlet begins on the road on a Thursday night in Huntington, West Virginia to take on the Thundering Herd of Marshall, followed by October 26th up the mountain to Boone, North Carolina to take on Appalachian State, followed by a non-conference game at UConn up in Storrs. And then we got to go to James Madison November 9th. So 5 in Atlanta, the last 4 early of the first half of the season are home games. The next 4 on the road, and then Arkansas State at home, at Texas State, Coastal Carolina at home to close out the regular season. But you're right. I've had a lot of people ask me, well, how good is Georgia State going to be? What's going to be the Dell McGee effect? And you guys got all these transfers coming out. How good do you think you're going to be? And I have to be honest with you, Dave, and we talked about this with a number of the other radio guys when we were in New Orleans for Media Day. I honestly don't know, and I don't think a lot of coaches are going to know until you get to that second or third week and what we call the dust settles with regards to these rosters, because bringing in so many transfers, you got to see how some of that chemistry is going to work when you're not playing a scrimmage and it's a real football game. Now, Georgia Tech will already have one game under its belt because they're playing Florida State in Dublin, Ireland.
I talked about that. They may be good and bad. Obviously, Georgia Tech's going to have an advantage of playing a game, but Georgia State gets the advantage of watching Georgia Tech play a game, so they know what's coming.
We're hoping a little bit of jet lag is going to figure into that one as well. When you get into full prep week. But then, you said it. We've got to get off to a good start. Whatever happens with Georgia Tech, Chattanooga, Vanderbilt, Southern, Old Dominion, all 4 in a row at home. We've got to win those football games because, as I said a minute ago, it's a gauntlet for the next 4 games once that homestand comes to an end.
It really is. It really is. He is Dave Cohen. He is the voice of the Georgia State Panthers. Really appreciate your time. Continuing our feature, Voices of the Sun Belt on Locked On Sun Belt. Enjoy the rest of the summer. Thanks for hopping on, and good luck to the Panthers this season. Appreciate your time, Dave.
All right, Dave. Appreciate it. Always good to come on and talk with you.